Well, before we begin, I should announce the winners of Absolution. Yes, remember in the last video, well, maybe you're a little bit late, but I said that if you'd like the chance to win a copy of Absolution, a brand new hardback copy, because that's all that's available, of course, just comment down below some of the things that Laura mentioned, the little code names that he talked about, and two of you did, and both of you guys are going to be winning a copy, a brand new copy of Absolution. So keep an eye on your mailboxes for those. And so for those of you who don't remember or are watching the future, I wanted to make this series of giveaways different because it's a very special series to me. That's why all you had to do was enter to win a copy of a book, and each and every one of you guys would have won a copy. I gave away a lot of copies of Annihilation, and the books dwindled from there, which is understandable. I know a lot of people don't hang out for all of these videos, but to the winners, congratulations, and thank you for watching to the end of every one of these videos. Welcome everybody to the final episode of Acceptance. This is the read-along book club, of course, of Jeff Vandermeer's Southern Reach trilogy. I finished this, man, has it been a week ago already? I read this final part right after I finished the part before that for the video, because I was so anxious just to get to the end, and I'm sure you were out there, so that's why this one's been delayed. And also because, I don't know, I needed to steep in it for a little while. I had to let it kind of settle in and think about it some, because as you know, this the conclusion to the book isn't quite what I think a lot of people expected, because I don't want to say it's kind of open-ended, right? Because we have Ghostbird and Grace kind of walking off, which is very reminiscent to the film Stalker by Tarkovsky, because they're throwing the pebbles looking for the border. I'll get more into that when we get there. And then also the letter from the psychologist, or Gloria, and that's it. No real explanation outside of that. We do get to see, of course, Saul's final form, I guess, his final fate. But I think a lot of readers out there might have been more tied to the plot itself versus the character arcs. But to me, it's far more about the character arcs than it is about any kind of plot about, you know, why Area X happened at all, even though that is definitely described a bit. Let me know. How did you feel about the ending? Were you just still loving it? Did you feel like it was a satisfactory ending? Or were you hoping for something more? But let's get into it, shall we? Chapter 4, I think this might be the last chapter of Old Saul Evans, the Lighthouse Keeper. Bring forth the seeds of the dead to share with the worms and gather in the darkness. So his little journal entries are getting crazier and crazier and crazier. But you see here, heard during the night, a screech owl, nighthawk, few foxes, a blessing, a relief. There's some subtext there, isn't there? Well, let's get a little bit deeper, shall we? At the lighthouse, the beacon was dark. The beacon was dark, and something was trying to spill out of him, or course through him on its way to somewhere else. The shadows of the abyss are like the petals of a monstrous flower that shall blossom within the skull and expand the mind beyond what any man can bear. But whether it decays under the earth or above on green fields or out to sea in the very air, all shall come to revelation and to revel in the knowledge of the strangling fruit. What is so interesting to me, well, one of the things that's interesting to me about this book is how it's merged spirituality and science, clearly with the seance and the science brigade as well, but just with Saul Evans, because we know he had a background, he was a preacher or a pastor, and this alien thing that infected him, changed him. It's almost as if what it's doing is inspired by who he was, his mind. Because as I mentioned in previous videos, there's religious connotations here, right? He's almost like a god in a way, sort of reimagining the world in his own image as he sees fit. And so it makes you wonder, what would have happened if Area X, whatever this thing that Area X is, came and embedded itself in someone else and transformed someone else? What would the world look like? He was still in shock from the bar. Kept believing that if he went back, it would prove to be some kind of waking vision. Saul parked the truck, stumbled to the lighthouse. He tried to get hold of Charlie out at sea and then call anyone else he could think of, but no one answered. Armed with a flare gun, Saul stumbled up the stairs. There's a glow awaiting him at the top of the stairs, and not the faint green phosphorescence that now arose from the walls. No, this was a sharp light that knew its purpose. He walked to the lantern room. The rug had been moved. The trapdoor lay open. A light shone out from the space, a light that circled and curved even as it had the discipline not to trickle across the floor or refract off the ceiling, but instead mimicked a door, a wall rising from the watchroom. At first, all he saw was a vast mound of papers and what looked like notebooks that now rose from the watchroom. So this is when we're really getting a glimpse into kind of this weird time warp, how he's seeing all of the journals that were left behind from the expeditions, but they haven't happened yet, right? So not only are we seeing these time jumps happen while you're in Area X, whatever that is, but also before it began, or as it's beginning, I guess, here with Saul Evans. It is indeed a record that he did not understand because it did not yet exist. Then his eyes adjusted and the source of the light coalesced, a blossom, a pure white blossom with 8 petals, which had unfurled from the top of a familiar plant whose roots disappeared into the papers below. He's teetering there on the edge of the trapdoor, staring down into the swirl of petals until he could resist no more, was falling into the pure white corona of a circle of fire, into a congregation, there's another religious word, of flames, a burning so pure that turning to ash was a kind of relief, engulfed by light that consecrated, again, not just him, but everything around him, anchoring, receiver, and received. There shall be a fire that knows your name, and in the presence of that strangling fruit, its dark flame shall acquire every part of you. And indeed, it has. When he regained consciousness, he was lying on the floor of the watchroom. There was no flower, just the bodies of Henry and Suzanne with no apparent wounds upon them, expressions blank and more haunting because of it. He clambered up the ladder. A figure in silhouette stood in front of the open door to the railing, a figure with a gun. Impossibly, it was Henry. "I thought you'd be gone longer, Saul," Henry said. "I thought you might not even come back tonight. That maybe you'd go over to Charlie's, except Charlie is out fishing, and Gloria is staying with her father. Not that she would be out this late anyway, or be of much help to you. But just so you know where we stand." "You killed Suzanne," Saul said. "She wanted to kill me. She didn't believe in what I found." "You killed yourself." "A strange thing to kill yourself. I thought maybe it was a kind of wraith." "Who are you?" "I found it, Saul, like I said I would, or it found me, only it wasn't what I thought." "Do you know what it is, Saul?" A fourth step, and Henry shot him in the shoulder. But Saul did not feel a thing. Very familiar, right? It's exactly when Grace shot Ghostbird, and she did not feel a thing either. Saul rushed Henry, ramming his bleeding shoulder into Henry's chest. Saul had the sense of a man being at a remove, a time delay, a gap or distance between receipt, acknowledgement, and response, a message coming to him from very far away, as if Henry were dealing with some other completely different situation, while on some level still able to appraise him, to judge him, because Henry was drawing them both to the railing. What are you doing?" But Saul wasn't doing it. Henry was, and didn't seem to realize it. "It's you," the albatross managed to say. "You're doing it, not me." "No, I'm not." Henry hit the railing hard, and Saul, a second later, swung to the side by momentum, and then they both went over. The surf, like white flame surging and questing across the sand. "I am come to send fire on the earth, and what will I, if it be already kindled?" The awful thud and crack when he hit. Which brings us to chapter 25, Control. There came to Control in the moment of extremity, an overwhelming feeling of connection, that nothing was truly apart, in the same way that he had found even the most random scrawl in the director's notes join some greater pattern. There arose a powerful music within him that he did not fully understand as he slipped and slid down the curving stairs. He was slipping in part because he was changing. He knew that, could tell that he was no longer entirely human. He clutched his father's carving to him as best as he was able. This machine or creature or some combination of both that can manipulate molecules, that can store energy where it will, that can hide the bulk of its intent and its machinations from us, that lives with angels within it and with the vestiges of its own terroir, the hints of its homeland, to which it can never return because it no longer exists. And yet, the crawler had used such a cheap trick. Control had seen his mother standing there. And nothing about language, about communication, could bridge the divide between human beings and Area X. That anything approaching a similarity would be some subset of Area X functioning at its most primitive level. A blade of grass, a blue heron, a velvet ant, which we also noted in Authority, right? I think it was when Control was out in the parking lot kind of losing his shit, and there were some velvet ants there. And I remember somebody let me know that Jeff Vandermeer once said, something is going on anytime you see a velvet ant. So now that's a little Easter egg for you if you have forgotten. Came down the most ancient of steps of stairs to the blinding white light at the bottom, shaped like an immortal plant, like a comet roaring, but stationary. If you haven't seen Annihilation, Go see it because there's a beautiful representation of the crawler, or I should say the crawler, but the very core of the lighthouse. It's a very different depiction, but I feel like they captured the alien nature of it very well. Now control, in quotes, fell away. Now he was the son of a man who had been a sculptor and of a woman who lived in a Byzantine realm of secrets. His father's carving fell from his hand, clattered onto a step, came back to a halt, there on the stairs, alongside the signs and the symbols left by his predecessors. A scrawling on the walls, an empty boot. Way back in the beginning when we found that empty boot. So control, in quotes, as noted here, he's kind of regressing. He's stripping away his identity and everything he was, and he's going back to the beginning because he's a son of a man who had been a sculptor and of a woman who lived in a Byzantine realm of secrets. And he would not now die on the steps. He would not suffer that final defeat. John Rodriguez elongated down the final stairs, jumped into the light. And that is the sad, sad ending of John Rodriguez, a.k.a. Control. But I forgot to mention this. I actually didn't highlight it. But he sniffed the air, felt under his paws the burning and the heat, the intensity. Paws! Interesting word to use there, right? That he's changing into something else, perhaps a rabbit. The cover of Authority, as well as when he was observing the border. Yeah, John Rodriguez, Control. Very, very sad story, a very tragic story. And I think it's because he never, to me anyway, got what he wanted or was seeking. He seemed like a lost little boy, as exemplified here, right? He was the son of a man who had been a sculptor and a woman, mother who existed in the deep recesses of the Southern Reach and Central. He's really just a poor little boy that never got much of a chance, a fair chance at life, I don't believe. His entire existence was him being thrown into what his mother thought was best for him, or what he thought his mother would think was best for him. He never really got a foothold in the Southern Reach, and once he came over into Area X along with Ghostbird, he was kind of lost. And he was waiting to move on. He was waiting to give in to what was coming. And here we finally have it. And I think he's the most tragic character in the entire story. I completely forgot about how he ended. And here it is. Although the psychologist, or Gloria, is also a very tragic character. Which brings us to her. Chapter 26, the director. 2 weeks before the 12th expedition, the old battered cell phone comes home with you. You don't remember bringing it. You don't know why security didn't question it. It's just there, in your purse, and then on the kitchen counter. Going into the bathroom every so often to throw up, a side effect of the medication you are taking for the cancer, apologizing to the janitor, and saying any foolish thing you can think of other than that you were sick. I'm pregnant, pregnant with cancer, pregnant with possibility. Possibility. You hear a sound in the hallway beyond the kitchen, just something settling in the attic, but it makes you nervous. You get your axe from where you keep it under the bed for home defense, then return to the couch to watch a 30-year-old detective show filmed in the South. Lost places, locations that don't exist now, that will never come back. A landscape haunting you from the past. So many things gone, no longer there. That's such a beautiful image because often when we're reading books like we are now, or watching TV or films, or basically consuming any kind of story, we kind of attribute it to our own lives, and that's what she's doing here. She's seeing these old places that don't exist anymore, that are captured on film and memorialized and been gone. And she knows that her entire life is slipping away. She herself is slipping away, but she wants that one last thing, that last bit of closure that is just out of reach. Then you hear something creeping low and soft across the tiles of the kitchen, just out of view. There, scuttling across the floor, blind and querulous, is the old cell phone, scrabbling and bulky, trying to get away from you. Except it isn't moving now. It hasn't moved the whole time you've been staring at it. So is this moving? Is it not? I don't know. It's kind of hard to know because she's not in her right mind. She's seeing shadows move, basically. But let me know in the comments, because we do know that this was a phone that Lowry brought back from Area X. It's Area X trying to call him, trying to tell him something, apparently. It's not out of the question that it is actually alive and moving, but this also could be her mind. With trembling hands, you retrieve the cell phone from the floor. There are notes you weren't sure you remembered writing, that you couldn't be sure had been here before. Did Whitby sneak into your office and create them, trying to help you, forging your handwriting? And then she goes to the backyard, burning a crap load of secret papers. What if you go back in, open that box, and the cell phone isn't a cell phone? What if containment is a joke? Tell me something I don't know. Tell me something I don't fucking know. You scream at the darkness and throw your glass into the night. You have to hang on. You're almost there. You can make it to the end. You stop investigating the SNSB. You stop investigating the lighthouse. You leave the notes that remain in your office, which you're well aware are legion. Many more than what you burned at home in your pointless effort at catharsis. Ever had anyone try to burn a house down? You ask the realtor later that night, ducking in for a quick drink. Oh, sure, the realtor says. Usual kind of thing with arson for the insurance. Sometimes it's an ex trying to burn down the wife's house once her new boyfriend has moved in. But more times than you might think, you don't find any reason for it at all. I had one guy who got the urge to start a fire on one day, and he let it all go up in smoke and just stood there watching. Afterward, he was crying and wondering why he'd done it. He didn't know. Indeed, more subtextual stuff for our friend Gloria here, because she's got nothing left. She really doesn't know what to do. She's trying to hang on for what, right? To get some answers, perhaps, even though she knows she probably is not going to have them. You're not really a realtor at all. She's a touch on some notes. She's a cell phone that won't sit still. The veteran comes outside. You're right. She's not a realtor, he tells you. She got fired. She hasn't had a job for more than a year. That's okay, you say. I'm not a long-haul truck driver either. I forgot about that. I forgot about she was lying about that. The plant remains in the storage cathedral. Whitby's mouse remains in his attic for the most part. The last few days before the 12th expedition, the phone migrates to your desk as a secret memento. You don't know whether you're more concerned when it is with you or when it is out of your sight. Which brings us to chapter 27, The Lighthouse Keeper. I was wrong. This is the last one. Saul woke on his back beneath the lighthouse, covered in sand. Henry crumpled beside him. He must be dying, he knew. Must be broken in 100 places, but he didn't feel broken. Instead, all he felt was a kind of restlessness, growing 100-fold now and nothing else behind it. But still there was a rising brightness, and the night staring down with thousands of glistening eyes. Thousands of glistening eyes. Remember that from the biologist, right? With a groan anticipating a collapse that never came, Saul rose without a stagger or a swoon. Whatever was coming into his head was being translated into words, his distress expressed as language. When he looked over at Henry, Saul could see, even in the dull darkness, that the man was still alive. That distant stare as locked and fixed on him as the stars above. That stare coming to Saul from across the centuries, across vast, unconquerable distances. Beatific and yet deadly, a scruffy assassin, a fallen angel ravaged by time. He made his way to the ridge of rocks that Gloria liked to explore, to the tidal pools, and sat there silent, recovering his sense of self. Out in the sea, he thought he could see the rippling backs of leviathans as they breached and then returned to the depths. There came the stench of oil and gasoline and chemicals, the sea coming almost up to his feet now. He could see that the beach was strewn with plastic and garbage and tarred bits of metal, barrels and culverts clotted with seaweed and barnacles, the remains of ships rising too, detritus that had never touched this coast, but was here now. Henry, like an awkward shadow, appeared at his side. Am I dead? He asked Henry. Henry said nothing. You're not really Henry anymore, are you? Who are you? Henry looked over at Saul, looked away again. Will I ever see Charlie again? Henry turned away from Saul, began to walk down the beach, broken and stumbling. He fell to the sand, crawling for a few feet before he lay still. Something was about to crest like a wave. Something was about to come out of him. Was this one of the ways God came for you? Saul managed to get into his pickup truck, could feel the sickness overflowing. There were comets erupting in his head and a vision of a terrible door and what had come out of it. So he drove, until he couldn't drive anymore. There in the most remote part of the forgotten coast, and trying now to hold his balance, trying to hold on to his wits, but a universe was opening up in his head, filled with images he couldn't understand. A flowering plant that could never die, a rain of white rabbits cut off mid-leap, a woman reaching down to touch starfish in a tidal pool, green dust from a corpse blowing away in the wind, Henry standing atop the lighthouse, jerking and twitching, receiving a signal from very, very far away. A man stumbling through the forgotten coast in army fatigues, all of his comrades dead, and a light that found him from above, pinning him there, some vital transaction complete. It's so interesting how he went basically through all of the entire books in that sequence of lines, right? We have the flowering plant, we have the rabbits. I guess control's not really in there though, right? We have the biologist, of course, we have the psychologist, but finally the transaction is complete. There were strange ruined cities rising from his head, and with them a sliver that promised salvation. And God said it was good, and God said, don't fight it. Finally, in that wilderness, Saul could go no farther. He was done, and he knew it. And he wept as he fell, as he felt the thing within anchor him to the ground, as alien as any sensation he'd ever felt, and yet as familiar as if it had happened 100 times before. It was just a tiny thing, a splinter, and yet it was as large as entire worlds, and he was never going to understand it, even as it took him over. Sometime later, he woke up. That winter morning, the wind was cold against the collar of his coat, as he trudged down the trail toward the lighthouse. At his feet lay a bramble in the thick gray of thistles. and that would bloom purple in the spring and summer. The brisk, fresh salt smell to the air had an edge of flame, a burning smell from some nearby house or still smoldering bonfire. Notice how this entire final scene are in italics. So he's transcended clearly. He's somewhere else. He's home, but he's not. This is sort of, I guess, what he's seeing now as the crawler. So he's not seeing reality as it is. He's seeing it, I guess, how he wants it to be or how it used to be. Anyway, very beautiful, beautiful end of The Lighthouse Keeper, Mr. Saul Evans. Which brings us to chapter 28, Ghostbird. The crawler was behind them. The words were behind them. It was just a submerged tunnel on a warm day. It was just a forest. It was just a place they were walking out of. Really weird start here. This is when the biologist and Grace are kind of just leaving. But the way she's describing it, it's not monstrous. It's not scary. It's not mysterious. It's like, no big deal. It was just a submerged tunnel on a warm day. Let's keep going. They encountered no one, and the animals, while not tame, seemed somehow unwary. Again, more change. Ghostbird thought of control back there in the tunnel. What had he found down below? Had he found the true Area X? Or had his death been the catalyst for the change he had felt that manifested all around them? So is control, is he the catalyst of this change? Is he writing Area X in a way? He's making it more peaceful, less aggressive? I'm not sure. He had been there almost his entire life, the real lived-in life she had now, not the one she had inherited. That still meant something. At the moment he had gone through the door so far below, she had seen him and had felt the crawler's seekers fall away, the entire apparatus receding into the darkness after him. There had come a shuddering miniature earthquake. So yeah, definitely something happened. They walked, they camped for the night. There were no soldiers, no suggestion of a ribbon stitching through the sky. The winter weather had lifted, and it was hot. It was summer now in Area X. Do you think the checkpoints are still manned? Grace asked. If we do make it through, what do we tell them? Ghostbird doubted there would be a them to tell. They reached where the old border had been. On the lip of the giant sinkhole, the white tents of the southern reach had turned dark green with mold. The brick of the army outpost was half pulled down and sunken in as if some giant creature had attacked it. There were no soldiers. There were no checkpoints. A velvet ant beside her foot. Remember what I said? What is it? Grace asked from behind her. Nothing. Nothing at all. Then she was walking again, laughing a bit, and everything was pressed out of her except a yearning for water and a clean shirt. Inexplicably, unaccountably happy. Grinning, even. A day later, they reached the Southern Reach building. The swamp had crept up to the courtyard and seeped across the tiles, pushed up against the concrete steps leading inside. From afar, they could see no sign of human life. Grace could not sense the way the building slowly took one breath and then another, the way it sighed. She could not sense the echo at the heart of the Southern Reach that told Ghostbird that this place had built its own ecology, its own biosphere. What if there is no world out there, not as we know it? Or no way out to the world. Grace saying this while existing in that moment in a world that was so rich and full. We'll know soon enough, Ghostbird said. So they walked forward, throwing pebbles as they went, throwing pebbles to find the invisible outline of a border that might not exist anymore. They walked for a long time, throwing pebbles at the air. And I mentioned that it's very similar to the film Stalker by Tarkovsky because in that movie, in that story, they use bolts, I think, and they're throwing it to just detect the anomalous activity so they don't walk into some kind of weird thing that tears them to pieces. But again, I've still yet to find any mention where Vandermeer talks about Stalker or Roadside Picnic being an influence, but there it is, which brings us to OOOX, the director. You sit in the dark at your desk in the Southern Reach in the minutes before leaving for the 12th expedition. You will leave it all a mess. The bookshelves have become overgrown. Your notes nothing anyone would recognize as an organized pattern. So many things that make no sense or only make sense to you, like a plant and a battered cell phone, like a photograph on the wall from when you knew Saul Evans. Your letter to him is in your pocket. But perhaps, too, it is like the script on the walls of the tower. The words aren't important, but what's channeled through them is. A pale, curious head peers in, turned at an angle. Whitby, the mouse peeking out from a shirt pocket. All ears and black little eyes and fragile hand-like paws. Grace will run the agency. Whitby will be its recording, its witness. You have to write down whatever you see, your observations. It might still be important. You can hear the surf in your ears. You can see the lighthouse, the words on the wall in the tower. At the border, you enter the white tents of the Southern Reach Mission Control. And the linguist, the surveyor, the biologist, the anthropologist are escorted to their separate rooms for the final decontamination, and conditioning process. Carefully, you sit down across from the linguist. You are trying to banish thoughts of your first trip across the border, the human cost across the years, the lives lost and broken, the long grift. Exactly what's been going on this entire time, right? She's finally realizing it's all for naught. The linguist has been placed on a regimen of psychotropic drugs. She has been operated on, reconditioned, broken down, brainwashed, fed false information that runs counter to her own safety, built back up again, and all of this she has on some level known about, volunteered for. Really interesting observation there, right? So I guess right here, the scene with the linguist is her looking at all of the terrible things they're doing to these people or have done to these people. And this is kind of a turning point for her, isn't it? But Lowry finding in her story of lost family members on the forgotten coast the closest thing to a Gloria surrogate. So she's moving on to Lowry, the linguist, is the next thing because maybe he's given up on the psychologist on Gloria. A plan that's really a guess in the dark, finding your way by feel. And that's something that's been reinforced again and again and again, because I know there were some people who had problems with the way the Southern Reach was run, how Central was run, how incompetent everything was. But here you go. He's telling you that like nobody really had any great information. They recorded lots of things. They tried to figure stuff out, but nobody ever really knew anything. And that's what she is yet again reminding us. You lean close and you take the linguist's hand in both of yours. You're not going to ask her if she still wants to go, if she can do that. You're not going to order her to go. And by the time Lowry finds out what you've done, it will be too late. She stares at you with an eviscerated smile. Beautiful description. You can stand down, you tell her. You can go home. It's going to be okay. It will all be okay. With those words, the linguist recedes from you, gliding back into the darkness, her in the chair in the room, as if they were merely props, and you're above Area X again, floating over the reeds down toward the beach, the surf beyond, the wind and the sun, the warmth of the air. The questioning is over. Area X is done with you. Has taken every last little thing out of you. And there's a strange kind of peace in that. A backpack, the remains of a body, your gun tossed into the surf, your letter to Saul, crumpled and tumbling across the dried seaweed and the sand. You were still there for a moment, looking out over the sea toward the lighthouse and the beautiful, awful brightness of the world. Before you are nowhere, before you are everywhere. And let's just read this together, this final bit, Gloria's letter to Saul. Dear Saul, I doubt you will ever read this letter. I don't know by what means it might get to you or if you could even understand it now, but I wanted to write it to make things clear and so that you might know what you meant to me, even in such a short time, that you might know that I appreciated your gruffness and your consistency and your concern, that I understood what those things meant and it was important to me, that it would have been important even if all the rest of this had not occurred, that you might know that it wasn't your fault. It wasn't anything you did. It wasn't anything other than bad luck. Being in the wrong place, the wrong time. The same way it always happens, according to my dad. And I know this is true because it happened to me too, even though I chose a lot of what's happened to me since. Whatever occurred back then, I know you tried your best because you always did try your best. And I'm trying my best too, even if we don't always know what that means or how it will play out. You can get caught up in something that's beyond you and never understand why. The world we are a part of now is difficult to accept, unimaginably difficult. I don't know if I accept everything even now. I don't know how I can, but acceptance moves past denial, and maybe there's defiance in that too. I remember you, Saul. I remember the keeper of the light. I never did forget about you. I just took a long time coming back. Love, Gloria, who lived dangerous on the rocks and pestered you true. Wow. Let that sink in. Such a great ending. So we know now that Gloria she needed closure. We all need closure, right? I mean, that's a big part of this book too, right? Is we have the biologist who, whether or not you think she cares about her husband, I think there was a bit of a turn in that regard where she wanted to find out what happened, right? She needed her own closure, right? Same thing with Control. He needed closure. He was kind of just played tug of war with. He was thrown about the Southern Reach or, doing all kinds of things his entire life that he did not want to do, that he was not made to do. And finally, he needed closure as well. And that's what he got when he went down to the bottom of the lighthouse, or the topographical anomaly, I should say. And of course, there's Ghostbird, who had a change of heart. I mean, she's very happy, kind of happy now, right? We do know that, or we think anyway, we hypothesize that Control was the trigger to this, that he was kind of the key to change things in a way, almost like Saul did. I guess the only person that really didn't get closure was Saul himself, poor Saul Evans, the lighthouse keeper that was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Well, my friends, thank you so much for hanging out with me all this time. This is my favorite trilogy that I've read up to this point. At the time of this recording, it's a very special series of books for me, so I'm glad I got to share it with you. I hope you enjoyed the ride. But the ride is not over. No, it's not, because we are going to finish this entire series by reading through Absolution, Book 4, actually the prequel of the Southern Reach series. It's not a trilogy anymore. Because I don't have the book and I haven't seen the table of contents, I don't know what page we're going to read to, but the book does come out on October 22nd, so I will be starting reading then. So just keep an eye out for the channel for video 1, and hopefully we will sync up about the same amount of pages. Until then, thanks for watching, thanks for hanging out with me, and thanks for reading along with me. And I'll see you guys in the next one.